The smell of burnt coffee clung to my uniform as I wiped the counter for the third time that morning. Outside, the rain hit the diner windows like it was trying to remind me of everything I'd lost. Then he walked in, tailored suit, silver cufflinks, the kind of arrogance that fills a room before the man even speaks. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in boardrooms once, before my name became a warning. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because trust me, life has a way of bringing your past right to your table when you least expect it. That was the morning Richard Blake sat in my section, and the past I buried found me again. The diner was already alive before the sun finished rising. Coffee hissed behind the counter. The bell over the door chimed every few minutes, and the scent of bacon clung to the air like something permanent. I'd worked that same corner booth for years, the one near the window where the morning light never reached. It was mine, in a way, my stage and my penance. That morning, he walked in. Richard Blake. Perfect suit. Perfect watch. The kind of man who looked like money never made him sweat. He ordered eggs like he was giving instructions to a servant. When I mentioned that the stock market was dropping faster than the temperature outside, he looked at me with that polished kind of pity that only the rich seem to master. Then he laughed, said something about how a waitress giving financial advice was adorable. I didn't laugh back. I just filled his coffee and listened to the sound of his credit card tapping the table, impatient, dismissive. The kind of sound that once came from my own hands, back when I still believed I'd earned my success. I remember thinking how easy it was for him to mock a stranger, how blind he was to what sat across from him. Because underneath the polyester uniform and the tired hands was someone who used to understand power better than he ever would. He didn't know who I used to be. There was a time when my name carried weight. Evelyn Harper. The woman who could turn market chaos into profit, who stood in glass towers overlooking downtown Chicago and advised men twice her age on how to keep their empires intact. I wore tailored suits that cost more than most people's rent and spoke in boardrooms where silence was power. I had earned everything through precision, instinct, and discipline. My son, Dylan, worked beside me then, fresh out of business school, ambitious, and eager to make me proud. I thought he was my legacy. The fall didn't come suddenly. It started like a small crack in glass. Whispers about missing funds, delays in reporting. I remember brushing it off, thinking, not my Dylan. But denial is the first stage of destruction. When the truth surfaced, it hit like a storm. My firm under federal investigation. My own signature on documents I hadn't read closely enough. Dylan had used my credentials to cover his tracks in a fraudulent investment scheme. The morning the FBI raided my office, I was drinking coffee out of a crystal mug, preparing for a client meeting. Then, sirens, suits, papers scattered like snow, cameras outside, headlines by noon, financial advisor Evelyn Harper under investigation. My career, my reputation, everything I built over 30 years, gone in a day. Dylan was sentenced. I wasn't. But in the eyes of the world, guilt and motherhood were the same thing. I remember sitting in the courtroom, the smell of old wood and stale air, watching him avoid my gaze. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. The world moved on without me. Clients stopped calling. Friends disappeared. The penthouse became too expensive, too empty. I sold everything, my home, my car, my dignity piece by piece. When I finally walked into the diner on the south side to ask for work, I didn't recognize the woman in the reflection of the glass door. My hands trembled as I tied the apron strings for the first time. But for the first time in years, no one expected anything from me. There was a strange peace in that, humility born from ashes. That was the beginning of the diner years. Murphy's Diner was nothing like the glass offices I used to live in. The ceiling fans rattled when they turned. The booths were patched with duct tape, and the air always smelled like burnt toast and grease. The walls carried years of fingerprints and laughter, and every morning at 6, the old jukebox by the door started humming before the sun fully reached the windows. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way I once defined beauty, but it was honest. My first few weeks there were hard. My knees ached from standing, and the weight of a tray felt heavier than any portfolio I ever managed. I used to measure my worth in quarterly gains. Now it was in clean coffee mugs and satisfied regulars. There was a rhythm to the work, refilling cups, taking orders, listening to the quiet hum of people just trying to get through another day. Somewhere in that noise, I started breathing again. At first, I worked in silence, hiding my past like a scar. But over time, I began to find comfort in small moments. When a truck driver thanked me for remembering his order, or when a young couple left me a note saying I made their morning easier. These weren't achievements you could frame, but they were real. The diner stripped away what didn't matter and left me with something pure purpose without pride. Each day began and ended the same way. Coffee, sunlight through the blinds, and a tired but steady heart. That morning felt no different. I didn't know yet that the man who would turn my quiet world upside down was about to walk through that front door. It started like any other morning. Steam from the coffee machines, the clang of dishes, the smell of bacon mixing with the faint trace of disinfectant. Regulars filled their booths, each locked in their routines. I'd learned to find peace in repetition. It gave me something solid to hold on to. But that morning, peace didn't last long. He walked in wearing power like it was tailored to his skin. Richard Blake, the kind of man who made the air shift when he entered a room. His shoes looked too clean for a diner like Murphy's, his voice too sharp, his tone too loud. He talked to the hostess as if she were background noise, as if kindness cost him more than money ever could. I'd met his type before, the kind that measured worth by watches and words. When I took his order, I noticed the leather folder beside him. Inside were papers, spreadsheets, projections, numbers scattered across lines I couldn't help but glance at. My instincts reacted before I realized it. The margins didn't add up. The patterns were off. Something about the numbers screamed risk. I felt the old reflexes kick in, the analyst's mind, the precision, the quiet thrill of reading what others missed. But before I could stop myself, I made a small comment. It was harmless. Really? Just an observation. He looked up at me, half amused, half offended, and dismissed me with a smile that burned colder than insult. A waitress giving financial advice. How cute, his eyes said. I poured his coffee, steady hands masking the heat rising in my chest. There was a time when men like him would have paid thousands for my insight. Now, I was invisible. Still, as he left, I caught my reflection in the window behind him. Older. Yes, but not defeated. I saw the woman I used to be flicker back for a moment. She was still there, buried beneath years of regret and grease-stained uniforms. I didn't know it then, but that single glance at his papers would pull me back into a world I thought I'd left forever. The morning after the storm, the city felt washed clean but heavy with silence. The streets outside the diner glistened under the weak light of dawn. The open sign still flickered to life, its hum the only sound breaking the still air. I was setting out the sugar jars when the door creaked open earlier than usual. He stood there, Richard Blake, drenched from the rain. His suit rumpled, confidence stripped to the bone. For a moment, I thought he was lost. Men like him didn't belong in quiet places at dawn. But then I saw it in his eyes, that look of someone who'd finally stopped pretending everything was fine. He mumbled something about a mistake, about numbers that didn't add up. He said I'd been right, though he couldn't quite say it out loud. There was a tremor in his hands, the kind I knew well, the look of a person realizing the floor beneath them was gone. Part of me wanted to turn away, to let him feel what arrogance tastes like when it crumbles. But another part, the part that once believed in second chances, kept me still. I'd seen that kind of desperation before, in my own reflection years ago. So, I wiped my hands on my apron and told him to sit. I didn't promise to fix his world, only to look at what was broken. He nodded, grateful but too proud to show it. As I poured him coffee, the balance between us shifted, quietly, permanently. I didn't know yet where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain: life had just given me a second chance to prove who I still was. The first time I walked into Richard's office, it felt like stepping onto foreign soil. The glass walls, the hum of machines, the sharp scent of cologne and ambition. It all hit me at once. For years, I'd traded this world for the hiss of coffee pots and the scrape of diner stools. My reflection in the chrome elevator doors looked out of place, older, slower, but still standing. The young faces at the conference table barely hid their judgment. Their eyes flicked from my plain jacket to my hands, still rough from years of washing dishes. To them, I was an antique, a relic from a time before hashtags and fast returns. But numbers don't care about youth. They don't care about fashion. They tell the truth to anyone willing to listen. I took a seat and opened their reports. The data was a mess. Over-leveraged, sloppy, blind optimism masking bad decisions. Within minutes, the fog lifted. The patterns re-emerged, familiar as breathing. I started marking errors, tracing risks, rebuilding models in my head. The room grew quiet. Richard watched me, not with pity this time, but with something closer to respect. My pulse steadied. I remembered the sound of boardroom silence, the kind that followed when I spoke, and people realized I was right. It wasn't arrogance. It was recognition. The work didn't just come back. It had never truly left me. The fear I'd carried since my fall began to fade. I felt my spine straighten, my voice return. Years of shame melted under the weight of clarity. When I left the building that evening, the city lights looked different, brighter, sharper. I wasn't the woman who lost everything anymore. I was the woman who still knew how the game was played. And this time, I intended to win it on my own terms. It was well past midnight when I noticed the first irregularity. The office was quiet, the kind of silence that hums around fluorescent lights and half-empty coffee cups. I'd been combing through Richard's financial records for hours, rows of numbers, line after line, until something in the data began to whisper that something wasn't right. a transfer that didn't belong, a project overfunded and underreported, and then another, small enough to slip past casual eyes, but deliberate. It felt familiar, too familiar. My pulse quickened as I traced the paper trail, each document leading me deeper into a pattern I hadn't seen in years. Then I saw the signature. Thomas Webb. The name hit me like a ghost I'd never buried. The same man who'd smiled at me across boardroom tables. The same man who'd fed my son bad deals that led to the FBI at my door. The man who had walked away untouched while my career burned. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my hand frozen on the mouse. After all this time, after everything I'd rebuilt, there he was, still poisoning from the shadows. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was rage. But emotion wouldn't serve me here. I steadied my breathing, pushing the anger down where it belonged. I saved every file, every record, every proof of his manipulation. I knew better than to confront him now. Men like Thomas thrived on chaos, and I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I smiled at my reflection in the darkened screen. I had played this game before, and this time, I wasn't the one being blindsided. By sunrise, I had a plan. I was going to bring him down, quietly, methodically, completely. The office was quiet that night, the kind of silence that carries the weight of unfinished truths. The blinds were half drawn, casting thin lines of light across the papers scattered on the table. Richard sat across from me, shoulders heavy, eyes distant. The fight had drained out of both of us. For once, there was nothing left to analyze, only what needed to be said. He spoke first. His words came slowly, haltingly, like something breaking free. He told me about the night his family died, how one phone call ended everything. Since then, work had been his shield, his way to feel useful, alive, controlled. Listening to him, I saw not the arrogant man who mocked me once, but someone haunted by loss too heavy to name. It made my own silence feel cowardly. I'd spent years pretending my past didn't exist, that the woman who lost everything had died with her reputation. But sitting there, I realized he deserved the truth. So I told him about Dylan, about the fraud, the FBI, the cameras, the shame that never washed off, about how I carried guilt for my son's choices like they were my own. When I finished, there was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. It was strange how two people who'd built walls out of failure could sit together in ruin and still find something whole. We didn't promise redemption that night. We didn't need to. But as I looked at him, I understood what was changing. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving my past. I was facing it. And I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Too much glass, too much steel, too many eyes waiting for someone else to speak first. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the shuffle of papers, the tension breathing through the walls. Thomas Webb sat across from me, perfectly composed, or pretending to be. Richard sat to my right, silent but steady. He didn't need to say a word. I knew why I was here. For a long time, I'd run from this kind of room. But that morning, as I stood before them, the fear was gone. I placed the folder on the table. Dozens of documents, cross-referenced ledgers, email trails, months of work distilled into one truth. Every inconsistency, every false report, every dollar redirected. I laid it out piece by piece, the way I used to before everything fell apart. As I spoke, I saw the same flicker in their faces I'd seen years ago. The disbelief that someone like me could know this much. But I kept my tone even. Calm was my weapon now. Then came the moment that changed everything. His name? Thomas Webb, linked to a shell firm from my old life. The same patterns, the same fraud that once destroyed me. My hands didn't shake this time. I looked at him, and for a second, I saw the past overlapping the present. The day the FBI raided my office. The day my son's face fell apart under the weight of his betrayal. The man responsible was still sitting in front of me. He tried to interrupt, to dismiss, but his voice cracked against the evidence. The board watched him unravel, the lies folding in on themselves, and I, finally, stood in the place where my story had once ended. Only now, I was the one holding the truth. When I finished, the room was silent. The kind of silence that follows when justice arrives without raising its voice. I gathered my papers, thanked them for their time, and walked out into the daylight. The air felt different, clean. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing redemption. I had earned it. For a long time, silence felt like punishment. It was the sound that followed every mistake, every headline, every door closing behind me. But standing here now, it feels different. Silence has become peace, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to prove. I used to believe redemption meant returning to what I'd lost. I thought if I could rebuild my name, I could erase the shame. But I understand now that healing doesn't mean undoing the past. It means learning to live with it without letting it define you. What happened with Thomas Webb didn't bring me joy. It brought me clarity. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It's a quiet balance. A moment when truth simply settles where it always belonged. Richard once told me that pain teaches us what pride never could. He was right. I've learned that strength isn't about control or wealth or reputation. It's about honesty, about waking up, facing your reflection, and forgiving the person you used to be. The city looks different now. The lights don't blind me anymore. They guide me, somewhere below. Murphy's Diner is still open, the smell of coffee drifting into the cold morning air. Life goes on, in small and steady ways, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that everyone deserves a second beginning. Sometimes, it starts not with triumph, but with the quiet decision to stand back up.